Good morning, River of Life Community Fellowship. It is time for our Thursday edition of Sunday School, where we have a short daily devotion since we can't meet in person for Sunday School. This last weekend, we talked about sin and temptation and how, as believers, we should deal with those things showing up in our lives. But as we've gotten on this week, I wanted to talk more about how we as believers are supposed to help our fellow believers deal with the sin and temptation in their lives. And today, I wanted to talk about a story out of the book of Nehemiah that I believe has very practical application for us in how we should be dealing with our fellow believers as they are dealing with sin and temptation. And so, the backstory of Nehemiah. Nehemiah was cupbearer to the king, and the Israelites were under subjugation. They were in exile, and then they were allowed to come back to Jerusalem, but still subject to this other empire. And Nehemiah was cupbearer to the king of this empire, and he had heard from his fellow Jews about how Jerusalem was still really in ruins, and how there was no wall around it, and things like that. And it kind of broke his heart, and so he worked, and he got permission from the king to return to Jerusalem and to help build the wall there, to kind of restore the honor of Jerusalem. And so then he goes to Jerusalem, he figures out what the problem is, and they start working, and immediately people's kind of like some of the people in the surrounding area that were not Jewish started kind of fighting against this, started opposing it. And at one point, as the work progresses and the wall is getting built and like gaps are being closed in it, these enemies start seeing this and they say, no, we can't allow this to happen. And so they made a plan to attack the workers in Jerusalem while they were working on the wall, thinking to themselves, like, they're going to be working, they're not going to be paying attention, they're not, by the time we're on top of them, it'll be too late for them to react. And so, but then Nehemiah finds out about this plan. And what he does is such an important thing for us to notice. When we see about this in Nehemiah chapter 4, so these enemies are planning to attack them, and this is what Nehemiah says. So in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, in other places, I stationed the people by their clans, and their swords, their spears, and their bows. And so what happened is, so that they were going to attack, these people were going to attack Jerusalem, and so Nehemiah finds out about it. So he takes people and he gets them armed, and he puts them in the gaps in the wall, where if there's an attack coming, the attack has to go through these gaps. So he puts armed people in the gaps. And then that was in verse 13 of verse 4, and we read a little bit later, we read this. In verse 16, from that day on, half of my servants worked on construction, and half held their spears, shields, bows, and coats of mail. And so what was going on is that in order for the work to continue, but yet to protect against attack, there were people standing in the gap. There were people armed and ready to defend the city, standing in the gap so that those who were working could continue working. And I think like that is such an important thing for us as believers, as we have people in our lives that they're dealing with temptation, they're dealing with sin. As fellow believers, we should be standing in the gap for them. So as God is working in their hearts, as God is helping them to build their faith and to build a resilient faith that can withstand the attacks of the enemy, that we are standing in the gap, armed and ready for combat on their behalf, so that the work can continue. And I think that's such an important thing for us as believers, that there are people in our lives who are struggling, and what they need is for us to stand in the gap for them, to stand up against the enemy so that the enemy can't get to them, so that the work of building their faith can continue. So what does that look like for us today? I mean, what does that look like in the lives of us as we're trying to work through our faith and help others work through their faith? And the first and foremost, one of the things that I talked about in dealing with temptation is we need to be accountable to other people. We need other people to help us deal with temptation. One of the ways that we stand in the gap is we be people that can help others deal with temptation. We keep each other accountable. We get in groups of people and we keep each other accountable to following God well and to dealing with the temptation comes in our lives and dealing with the sin that shows up in our lives so that we can grow, so that our faith can continue to grow. So one of the ways that we stand in the gap is to be people that can be trusted to come to. When someone's dealing with temptation, we should be someone that they can come to in trust. They trust we're not going to just blab their issues all over the world, that we're not going to just throw things out at them, that we're not going to judge them and hate them, but that we're going to love them and we're going to carry their burdens through this and help them stand up and help their faith grow. And one of the other ways, and this is so very important, one of the other ways that we stand in the gap is through prayer. Like if we know someone is struggling with something, we pray for them. We get down on our knees and we reach out to God on their behalf. We intercede for them so that and like prayer is the most powerful thing that we have at our disposal. And when we pray, especially when we pray for other people, we're asking God to put his power into that situation. And there is nothing greater than the power of God. And so if we're asking God to do this on their behalf, it helps and strengthens them because God's power comes into the situation and it helps encourage and bolster their faith so that they can deal with the temptation in their lives, so that they can deal with the sin in their lives, and so that their faith can grow. And so those are just two very practical things that we can do. We can be trustworthy people that people can come to and share their concerns with, and we can pray for people, like really intercede for them. So my encouragement to you is to, first of all, start praying. Start praying for the people in your lives. Start praying for the things going on in their lives to help them get through it. And then also just be ready with your ear and be ready to share the heart of God into their lives if they come to you while they're struggling. And that is how we stand in the gap. That is how we help protect the faith of others as their faith is being built up. So that's my encouragement for you today. Make sure that you are serving others as you're trying to serve God. Thanks, and God bless.